Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the international edition of Future Hacker. This is our conversation with Monika Rogozinska, and this is the second episode. Make sure you hear the first episode, which we are talking about new technologies used in the pharma industry. So, Monika, moving on. How open are the doctors, nurses, and the professionals in healthcare in general to the use of new technologies? Innovations like augmented reality should be a great ally for educating health professionals, right? So how is the education in healthcare keeping up to qualify the sector in the use of those technologies? My understanding is that the only way of increasing the adoption and making use of its benefits is through the acceptance of those professionals. Am I correct?
So yes, technologies such as artificial intelligence or augmented reality has the potential to improve health outcomes and the quality of life of millions of people. Only that can happen if they gain a trust from doctors and nurses and patients, policy and regulatory, and also the commercial obstacles are removed. It's interesting you mentioned augmented reality because we chatted a lot about AI application already. So let's discuss the AR application life science. Augmented reality is the use of displays, cameras, and sensors to overlay digital information on the real world, in the contrast with the virtual reality, which creates an entire new world. Augmented reality allows us to bring the most useful information from the digital realm into our perception of the environment around us. And healthcare and medical fields will be among the first to embrace the AR in a big way. There is expectation that the market is going to grow significantly and is projected to be worth $5.1 billion by 2025. Recent hardware and software advances also have reduced the cost of augmented reality while significantly improving the experience for user development already. In fact, there are many nurses and doctors interacting with the AR application every day to improve patients' education and outcomes. For example, it has been used as a tool in medical training with students learning about the human anatomy through simulations. Surgeons also use this to prepare for very complex surgeries. It has been also used for pain relief for patients. Augmented reality is used in healthcare facilities across the world today for applications which include vein visualization, surgical visualization, and education. Forward-thinking healthcare providers are already investing the potential benefits of AR in their customers and their businesses. And big pharma companies recognize the potential of virtual reality tools as well. So Novartis is using them in the drug design process, and Pfizer is experimenting with various applications from the clinical trial design to manufacturing. As with every new technology, only time will tell us how eagerly those new solutions are adopted. We are still in the early stages of AR evolution. But this year and into future, we can expect to see an explosion of AR devices and application entering the market with significant advances to the education of patients and healthcare professionals, communications, and patient outcomes.
So what about the boundaries of using disruptive technologies in science? When it comes to gene editing, to be able to choose how your child will look like, to fighting the aging process, to cloning animals, and the list goes on and on. Are we having the necessary discussions as a society? Here at Future Hacker, we've heard a lot about how human nature can't keep up with the speed of technologies. So how to balance the incentives to innovate with the necessary regulations and vigilance in the name of ethics?
We all remember when in December 2018, a Chinese researcher Ha Jiankui shocked the world when he revealed the birth of world's first genetically edited babies. While it was very clear that he violated university regulations and ethical standards, his announcement has ignited a heated international dialogue about the permissibility of human embryonic gene editing. Currently, there is a scientist in the United States working in university laboratories experimenting with genetic editing of human embryos. But, implantation of those edited embryos is strictly forbidden per US FDA regulations. Still, the scientists and public have increasingly begun to question the implication of this research. There are a few important points in this debate. It's a key to realize that most scientists are not opposed to editing somatic cells. And the somatic cells is simply, there are regular cells like heart cells or kidney cells, and cells which really confine the changes. The genetic changes will be confined to the specific individual. It's different with germ cells or embryos because the genetic changes for those, when they can be passed down to many future generations, and basically allowing the scientists to direct evolution. And harmful genetic defects could be edited out of families, eventually human populations. If you, for example, edit the gene that controls HIV entry into cells, this might confer resistance to HIV infections. However, it may also lead to increased sensitivity to other infections, or over time might result in evolution of HIV virus to be more virulent strain, which uses other mechanisms of entry. Certain genetic defects that cause several diseases could be cured by embryonic gene editing. And currently, there's a Columbia University professor, Dieter Egli, working on trying to edit embryos to fix the genetic diseases that cause retinitis pigmentosa, which is kind of an inherited form of blindness. There is a little argument in medical community that the treatment of RP represents a great unmet need, because it's really a great unmet need. However, several scientists say that one scientist like Egli published the recipe for editing embryos for diseases such as RP, there will be no stopping others from using those technologies to edit embryos, even for malicious purposes. There are concerns, and there are basically two groups of people. One is the scientists which try to put a moratorium on gene editing research, and the others which says, especially in developed countries like US, where the science is ethical, should set an example for how to conduct the gene editing research responsibly. So those are still open questions. Would embryonic gene editing be permissible? Should a moratorium on this type of research be imposed? Or should scientists be encouraged to continue that work because they can cure uncurable diseases? Honestly, Maria, I'm not in position to answer those questions. The dialogue has to continue, and a relevant body, potentially international one, should be regulating and reviewing proposal for what is called heritable human genome editing, and try to influence whether countries decide to allow to use it. For more than 1 year, there's an existing body called International Commission of Clinical Use of Human Germline Genome Editing, which is a very long time, but they really do a lot of good work. They review all the scientific literature on CRISPR, which is one of the methods of modifying the DNA. They have excellent members. There's more than 18 members from 10 countries, various group experts, which include science, medicine, genetics, ethics, psychology, and law. They really raise very important key points and recommendations. The Commission goal was described the responsible clinical translational pathway that could move the genome editing from the lab to assisted reproduction intervention from human diseases. However, they want control. They want to make sure that they have specific body that's going to regulate and oversee clinicians and researchers, but also giving them the ability to alert the bodies, the regulatory bodies, if something concerning is happening. So, for example, create a hotline for whistleblowers. They also acknowledge that the CRISPR, which is the current method of gene editing, still cannot efficiently and reliably make precise changes without causing undesired changes to human embryos. Also, what they did, they proposed a 6-letter hierarchy and categorized potential uses of human genome editing. The simple one is the one that we discussed just before. The use of human genome editing, basically easiest to justify, would be helping those couples who, even with in vitro fertilization and screening the embryos, have very little or no chance of having a baby which is healthy without inherited genetic conditions. Diseases like this, like Huntington's disease or cystic fibrosis or beta thalassemia, they are severely morbid and cause premature death. So that would be easy category to handle when it comes to potentially editing the genes in embryos. But there are also very controversial categories. The one you mentioned in your question. So one of the 6 categories, actually the 5th category, is the category of enhancements, like enhancements of children, making them resistant to HIV or better at sports, taller, smarter, or even, able to withstand radiation exposures. And this is really controversial category and falls really outside of traditional research, especially in my domain. It has nothing to do with finding cure or treatment for genetic disease. It will certainly generate the most resistance from scientific community and broader society. And of course, as we learn with junk babies, it may not stop some scientists from making this a reality.
Yes, that's definitely no easy answer, right? And as you said, the dialogue must go on, especially when it comes to curing diseases. Let's move on. We could spend, I think, a whole podcast just discussing that, and this is just a fascinating subject. So moving on, for the last 10 years, those popular genetic tests, just like those 23andMe, they allow those regular people, customers, to discover their genetic risks of developing certain diseases. And now there are more companies entering this game. Those predictions, they could help patients undergo preventive and individualized treatments rather than reactive treatments when the condition is already developed. Simultaneously, there are concerns related to data privacy with any genetic health data, for example. There is this fear of misusing information if it gets into, for example, insurance agencies or even employers' hands. So how do you see the exploration of this field and its implications?
The threats are really quite real. Genetic genealogy databases have aided law enforcement in US in successfully solving some of the most notorious unsolved crimes like Golden State Killer. And now from the legal standpoint, there's an always option to opt out from the data sharing with the law enforcement. However, there are many other abuses of genetic information which may outweigh the benefits it may bring. Its potential use in predictive policing and other algorithms which determine life insurance claims or mortgages. Currently, the use of genetic information is not really sensitive or accurate enough to be used fairly. In the US, we have a Genetic Information Non-Discriminatory Act of 2008, and this is the act that United States designed to prohibit some types of genetic discrimination. There are some voices that the act should be really expanded to cover all forms of genetic discrimination, enforcing greater transparency of algorithms and prohibiting the sale of genetic information. First, expanding regulations to cover all forms of genetic discrimination will allow government and our broader society to fully understand and debate the use of those genetic data before any decisions using this information are made. And since despite the technology advances, algorithms still perpetuate discrimination, the recommendation will be that the use of genetic information and algorithms should be both regulated and very transparent. The discussion around how to make algorithms and technology more transparent must include the awareness of the potential future use of those genetic data. To avoid exploitation of customers, the policy should be clear, specifying that ancestry companies should not really sell that data. and transfer it anywhere after I bought it. Because there's a concern that even if the companies have adequate cybersecurity measures, the data are still vulnerable to abuse when being transferred between companies with different privacy regulations. Customers also urgently need more transparency around what data is collected and how it's used in algorithms that increasingly dictate our lives. And Cambridge Analytica scandal serves as a very strong reminder of the price we pay if we not safeguard our privacy, and that the next abuse of our private genetic data could be even bigger and have bigger consequences.
Yes, that's a great reminder, Monika. Moving to a complete different subject before we end this episode. And, with still Future Hacker, we have to talk about wearables, right? So wearables in healthcare, there's so many cool stuff being developed. There's so many startups developing solutions like smart contact lenses to monitor the health and even the glucose level, all those wearables that slowly release drugs into the body instead of having to take pills. So for people that have to take all those pills along the day, this for sure would make their life easier, not to mention that, they would stop forgetting to take them. So could you just tell us a brief overview of the trends in this area, and which do you think will be the main breakthroughs in the near future?
Sure. Wearable technology in healthcare includes electronic devices that customer can wear, like Fitbits and smartwatches, and are designed to collect the data of users' personal health and exercise. That market is actually exponentially growing, and it grew from 9% to 33% from 2014 to 2018. It's continuing growing. Trending wearables include fitness trackers, blood pressure monitors, ECG monitors, smart health watches. But to me, personally, the most interesting category are biosensors. And those are the wearable medical devices that are radically different from all those wrist trackers and smartwatches I mentioned. An example is the Philips wearable biosensor in a self-adhesive patch that allows patients to move around with collecting data on their movement, heart rate, respiratory rate, and temperature. One of the recent exciting developments from MIT labs is MemGlove. I'm not sure whether you hear about it, but this is something that I learned during the MTech conference in 2020. First, it costs barely $60 to manufacture. And second, it contains no embedded electronics. This means that sensing the data and data transfer come from primarily soft textile-based communication through needed fibers. Beyond the positional data, the glove gathers, it also captures biometric data about the users, like heart rate, and data about the object in hand, which are temperature, pressure, conductibility. The glove is built for future applications like a video game where you can grab an object for your desk and have it seamlessly incorporated into gameplay. Maybe it's not a typical wearable, but certainly good to mention because I think it's very interesting. In healthcare setting, any new wearable, any new device that startup creates is just tool for data collection. We cannot forget about it. So the revolution itself, and that's my personal opinion, it's not really in device, but really in data. So this is where I believe the future of healthcare is. And I would like to guide everyone through some of the points. The first big source data for the big data in medicine is electronic medical records, which is so-called EMR. Then claim and billing data, imaging data, pharmacy data, they basically come from providers and payers. The second source are omics, and we include genomics data, for example. And the third, which we are talking about right now, are wearables. So that's also source of the big data. Data from smartphones, internet activities. They are really, really critical because it's estimated that in the future, about 2/3 of all medical related data will come from the patient created sources. So taken together, this evolution of microprocessors, storage, networks, mobile access sensors, DNA sequencing, has enabled massive medical data sets to be assembled and analyzed. And the big data will provide unparalleled opportunities to answer questions that cannot be really answered through regular clinical trials, or will provide information on rare events or rare populations, enable new understanding about human behavior and actions, discover and detect completely new associations. In life science, the big data is especially important in the context of the future. They will certainly be very important and be incorporated into standards and guidance for clinical management. They will generate new hypotheses. And maybe in the future, cognitive system using artificial intelligence may be able to infer and predict and augment medical decision-making. And obviously, big data doesn't come without its challenges. It's really not easy to use them and not easy to acquire, process, clean them. And the interpretation is also difficult, and it requires collaboration from various experts, many other people with different specialties like physicians, statisticians, engineers, project managers, biologists, and also requires procedures and quality standards. On the top of that, I'm sure you know that the majority of that data is highly unstructured, up to 80%. They're really text, imaging, and audio. And there are tremendous challenges trying to process the diverse medical vocabulary in natural language text. Big data is very complex, very high dimensional. And there are many biases and quality issues with EMR and claim data. Even with those challenges, I think big data and wearables, all of that is really worth the effort, because healthcare analytics data mining from wearable devices such as Fitbit, Apple Watch, and others will provide information that can be a base for individuals' treatment, recommendations, exercise routines, and diets. Predicted that, in the future, the data from social media can also provide additional data for self-defined populations. And data from wearables may allow patients to find patients like me, which means learn about the clinical outcomes and design, personal treatments for the best possible outcomes. So before I really wrap up this topic, I very quickly want to mention about one key constraints, because many people don't realize, but the constraints are regulators. And unfortunately, in the US, FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, has been very slow to approve innovative diagnostic software. And there are many remaining barriers to rapid innovation. For example, our HIPAA laws, which are, basically laws protecting patient privacy, they create legal barriers to the flow of patient data to applications that could utilize AI technologies. And we could really use that because anticipated negative effects of approved drugs could be much sooner reported and more rigorously than today. But mobile applications that analyze drug interactions may be blocked from pulling the necessary information from patient records. And more generally, AI research and innovation in healthcare are hampered by the lack of widely accepted methods and standards for privacy protection. So as you see, regulation can be really an important obstacle in innovation. Since we are talking about the future, we need to make sure that the regulators do not lag behind those innovators.
Yes, you're completely right, Monika. So everybody, this is the end of the second episode, but stay tuned as we're having a third one with Monika.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.